likely have another press event on Thursday as well to further brief you on a lot of information we're learning about the process and what we're finding now that I'm here in the governor's office. But today is about 10 announcements, and I wanted to provide you some background for it. We're going to provide you with summaries about 8 executive orders, a statement of intent to work with the legislature, and then also a letter that we'll be sending to the West Virginia congressional delegation and President Trump today. But let's start with the executive orders, day one actions. Number one, I've issued an executive order that will be going to our cabinet and to all departments, agencies, to begin the economic backyard brawl across West Virginia. I believe this is standard of living, and so none of this is new to anyone who's been following me, but now the formal process under government begins of looking at every tax, looking at every regulation, every workforce rule, licensing rule. We issued that direction to formally make that happen. I'm a big believer that if we can have freer, more dynamic policies compared to our neighbors, we're going to succeed. So that leads off the way. The backyard brawl economically begins, and we're excited to make that happen. Second, we're issuing an executive order saying that school choice is going to be a top priority for our administration, and then I plan to work with the Speaker, with the Senate President, with the legislature to do everything possible to ensure that school choice and the Hope Scholarship are successful, and I anticipate working closely with them on any legislation we may need to further those goals and to continue to ensure that West Virginia has the broadest school choice laws in the country. I've been talking about that for years. That should be no surprise, but we anticipate legislation in this area. We look forward to working with Speaker, Senate President, and others to make that happen. Number three, we're issuing an executive order terminating any DEI. We are expressly sending a letter to all of our cabinet officials and agency heads and indicating that there should be review of any potential DEI that may exist within state government. We want to have a review of recruiting, of retention, of programs, of policy, or any issue which might express an inappropriate preference for race, for sex, for national origin. Some of these classes that have been used and manipulated in the past. It's important we do that. We're also going to ensure that any state money, that we're not spending money for dollars that flow from hard-earned taxpayer dollars for DEI purposes. Serves nothing less. Our fourth executive order, this is important. People who know me well know that I believe in efficient, accountable government, and we're going to go after waste as much as humanly possible. So today, I'm announcing that my administration will be conducting a review of every major spending decision that's occurring within this fiscal year. That means beginning July 1st, 2024 to June 30th. So we're going to be going backwards in time. Any expenditure that occurred that was $100,000 or more, I'm asking my cabinet and agencies to look at. And if there are other wasteful items, we want the public to point that out to us because we're willing to review it. But there'll be a retroactive review, and then we're, of course, going to be reviewing all of the plans going forward to June 30th. If we identify that there are opportunities to rescind programs and spending, we will do that. We'll obviously look closely at each item to make sure that everything we're doing is consistent with the law. But I think the taxpayers know that the era of big spending is over. And we have to make sure that we're taking things that next year there'll be a projected budget deficit. And so I want to begin to prepare for that possibility and make sure that government is working leaner and more efficiently and more effective than I would do it. I've been thinking about this for a very long time. I think it's important that taxpayers always get to know what happens. And we're going to share that information with you as we get it. Number 5, we're doing an executive order directing our agencies and boards to develop a plan for more efficient government. Beyond just the immediate spending review, we want to question things. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing what matters for taxpayers, proper functions. I think that every part of state government needs to be looking closely to say, how can we gain more efficiencies than what currently exists? And I want to realize significant savings, because that is going to have to get factored in to the budget that we'll be submitting to the legislature next month. We also have an executive order we're issuing today that's examining all the rules and regulations that exist in West Virginia. And we're looking at items that are outdated, that are complex, or regulations that may impede the flow of commerce, that actually don't have tangible value for our citizenry. It's important that we review things from time to make sure that we're putting the citizens of West Virginia first. I'm also announcing a new executive order that is interpreting the law, and I want to make sure I cite this correctly for you. We're going to be implementing the Equal Protection for Religion Act, and we're ensuring that the current policy, which does not recognize a religious and conscientious exemption for vaccines, set up a process to recognize these differences. We believe that the Equal Protection for Religious Act strongly argues in favor of religious and conscientious exemptions. West Virginia right now is an outlier. There are only several states that don't recognize religious exemption. Today that changes, and we will be making that available to you. I expect all these executive orders we're going to be releasing in the next few hours, so you'll have time as you write up your reports. So we have vaccines as number 7. Then we also are going to be doing an executive order which is reviewing all prior executive orders that have existed. We're not aware of when the last time people have gone back to do a wholesome review, going back in time, of whether executive orders exist from 30 years ago, 20 years ago. We thought it's prudent to go back and see what rules are we operating under. The public deserves to know that we're being transparent and what the rules of the road are. So we're going to go through that process and identify the current executive orders. To the extent that some need to be eliminated, we'll do that. If they need to be modified, we'll do that. But that's going to be an important part of our review. Today, I'm also announcing an intention to partner with the legislature to be clear on gender, that men are men and women are women, and we plan to work with the legislature to introduce legislation classifying that under law. And I think that that's one of the areas I hope that we're going to be able to reach some consensus with the House and the Senate, but we're looking to collaborate with them on that goal. We're also sending a letter today to our West Virginia congressional delegation, I think on a matter of great importance for the citizens of our state. Fentanyl has ravaged our state and killed so many people. We've all been working very hard fighting the drug plague, but I think we need additional help. We need the federal government to step in and work with us. So I am asking our West Virginia congressional delegation to work with me and for them to advance policies that list fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, on that fact. These are 10 announcements. They're swift, they're decisive, they're really important for setting the framework for how my administration plans to operate. I don't expect that we're going to get everything done overnight, but you should expect a lot of action over the course of the upcoming weeks. We're going to have a very busy 100 days. I'm going to try to communicate to everyone here what's going on, and I thank you all for coming. I'm going to open it up for questions for anyone here. Leah.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for doing this in person.
Sure.
I know you said with the DEI executive order, the first area of business will be an evaluation throughout the state to see whether this is happening, whether it's being funded. Do you have any evidence now that it
We do, actually. What we'll be doing, though, is I want to go through the process so that we can make announcements, but we're going to be in a position to point it out. I also want to give people, I think one thing you'll find about me, I want to give people the opportunity to do the right thing and make the changes. And before I start calling everyone out, I want to see the changes put in place. And so we do believe that it still exists, and we want to make sure that it doesn't happen. Of why DEI should be eliminated. Several years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a very important decision pertaining to school admissions. Many of you may remember that. It dealt with Harvard, it dealt with North Carolina, and they were very clear that having these types of preferences by groups, by race in that instance, that was inappropriate. I want to be clear, Virginia. So we're going to make sure that we go through this process, we analyze it, and then we make determinations. But we are aware of some, and we're going to make sure that...
I do this through executive order versus go ahead and do it through the legislature.
Yeah.
And related, sometimes DEI gets a little bit mishmash with equal protection and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But you're not saying that there's going to be, of course, any discrimination in hiring
No, of course
or
not.
practices in regards to race, religion, sex.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question, Stephen. So this is twofold. Number one, we're issuing the executive order because within the power of the governor, we have the ability to make sure that the law is being enforced. That's one of the functions of the executive branch. But we, of course, have great respect for the legislative process, and we would look forward to working with the legislature on that. As you'll begin to see with some of these executive orders, there are things we can do immediately, but then many are going to require codification, whether you're talking about DEI, whether you're talking about school choice, whether you're talking about elements of the backyard brawl, or the vaccine exemption. One thing that I would note, and you'll see within the EO that comes out this afternoon, that with respect to vaccines, is important, because when the Equal Protection for Religious Act was passed, it didn't amend specific laws, so the vaccine law's a standalone. We want to make sure that specific laws that may be in conflict with others get addressed and are clarified by the legislature. So we envision this as a two-step process.
Well, on vaccines,
Yeah.
are you indicating to us that you believe that there's a religious protection element of state law that trumps the vaccine mandate that's currently in state law, and that's how you guys are interpreting it?
Rights for this very scenario we're talking about, that if children and parents, if they have a religious or conscientious objection to the vaccines, that they're going to go through a process that we're going to set forth, and that if they weigh in and they have that exception, that held belief, then that would actually trump that, because you have to give meaning to this law, and I don't think that that's been done appropriately to date. So I want to make sure that that happens. But to be clear, the way the language is drafted, we want to be amending the specific area. So that's, I think, the ideal way to do it. This is a step forward within the power of the government, what we control.
And then with that said, this issue, of course, was through legislation last year. The governor vetoed that bill, and it was one of the more decisive items in the context of the legislative session. Yeah. Doctors and hospitals and different medical professionals weighed in heavily with great concern about what this exemption would do. Will you address those people who had great concerns about this just a few months ago?
I think most West Virginians care very deeply that our citizens have religious beliefs. And we also know that the First Amendment to our Constitution has specific clauses calling for free association. This is so core to West Virginia. And West Virginia is an outlier. West Virginia is one of only very few states that doesn't recognize that. The current law, I think, needs to be implemented. So our decision today focuses on that and recognizes these very important First Amendment concerns. I will say to you that I will always be willing to talk to anyone and everyone about these, but we cannot compromise individuals and parents' deeply held religious convictions, and we have to make sure that we're complying with law and the Constitution.
Last thing on that, and then I'll leave it alone. They said that this type of exemption would make people sicker. Your response?
I think that, once again, it's really important that West Virginia is not an outlier. We don't want to have these policies that only 4 or 5 states in the country have. And I think having a religious and conscientious exemption, I don't think is going to lead to any compromise. In fact, I think that it's going to put West Virginia back into the mainstream, where we're recognizing the Constitution. We're recognizing the religious beliefs.
All these messages as
Yeah.
a whole, right? You probably most liked on your first day. Okay, so some people say that. Okay.
Most what?
You're most liked on your first day as governor.
Yeah.
Right? So kind of give me some thought about that. Why strike now? Why strike so quickly? If you give me some context.
Sure. Well, I think that there's a need for decisive action throughout state government. West Virginia is an amazing place. You know that I have a deeply held belief that we are, and we're challenges that we have. And I know as you look at the first number of executive orders that we have, I'm not going to be afraid to say, well, today, a lot of the key economic indicators were 48, 49, and 50. The truth is that we have to begin that process now. That's why we have 10 different items across the spectrum on various issues. A lot of them on economic and regulatory matters that are deeply important for the future success of the state. But there are also important issues relating to citizens' freedoms that we have to make sure that we're articulating. At the end of the day, the governor helps to ensure that the Constitution is interpreted correctly and it's enforced the right way. And that's why we're proceeding in this matter.
A question for you regarding the vaccines.
Yeah.
So, specifically, what kind of vaccines are we talking about here? Are we talking mainly about COVID-19 or flu vaccines? We're talking about things that have been here for a long time, like polio, things
Yeah.
like that people could be exempt from.
So right now, the Equal Protection for Religious Act, that doesn't distinguish. This is broad application. So we believe that.
Like, I know this is hypothetical, but if there are families who feel like a conviction about one vaccine for another, how are maybe schools or places going to be able to maybe distinguish whether one family's convictions or
Right.
preferences should be, taken seriously versus another family who says, no, I don't know, just depending on the vaccine they feel maybe convicted on or something like that.
I think what you're going to begin to see, first of all, we're going to have a process because we want to do this in full compliance with the law, right? So that there's an implementation and that they'll be administered through the Bureau of Public Health to make sure this is done right. But I think what we're talking about is straightforward. We would envision something along the lines of if someone submits an affidavit that they have that religious belief, and regardless of the vaccine, that we believe would meet the definition of the law that was passed a couple years ago that I don't think has been fully and properly enforced. So there shouldn't be confusion by anyone. There's a process that we'll be announcing to make it very straightforward for people to deal with. But I want to send a message that if you have a religious belief, then we're going to have an exception. We're not going to be the outlier of 4 and 5 states anymore.
You mentioned school choice. Yesterday in your speech, you said that you wanted to make teacher pay competitive in the
Yeah.
United States. And Hope Scholarship set to more than double in cost this year. How do you expect to balance those two in the budget?
Sure.
And what can teachers expect?
Well, I know that one of the challenges that falls to the governor, especially a new governor coming in, is that you have to submit a budget to the legislature, and that comes for me unless so. We're in the process right now of beginning to go through to look at the financial status for the rest of the year and next year. But I think that it's important that the legislature and the governor work together to advance the Hope Scholarship and school choice. We recognize that there are always people that want to change things. I want to make it work as it's intended and to be as broad as possible. So we'll look at all the different financial issues, but I think it's a priority that our kids are getting the best education possible. And we believe that the Hope Scholarship is that difference maker, to be the cornerstone of educational achievement. And we're obviously also going to be looking at a lot of policies pertaining to the public schools as well, as I talked about in my speech yesterday, the focus on math, on science, on phonics. So all these are different issues we'll be working with the legislature on, but I wanted to express my intent how important the School Choice Hope Scholarship Program is.
So just to follow up, should teachers expect a pay raise in this fiscal year in your budget?
I want to be more competitive. I was really clear about that. Now, look, the reality is that there's some pretty significant distinctions in pay, and I've talked about that on the campaign trail, right? The fact is that if you look at Loudoun County or Washington County, you look at some of the areas, and you look at the border on the Ohio River, you could see some big distinctions in terms of pay level. You go down to Southern Virginia, the Virginias. I want to make sure we're looking at that and we're doing that comparison. And then we want to think through the best way we can do it because I respect our teachers. I think the teachers are so critical, and we want to make sure that we're going to be able to better compete. So we're looking to provide more resources to make sure we're rewarding our best, try to help as much as we can. This is obviously not a decision solely by myself. We're going to work with the legislature to make that happen, but I do think that teachers need to be treated so well, and I'm committed to that and putting more resources into the hopper. Hey, how are you?
Good, thanks for having me.
Good.
Specifically with the Hope Scholarship, it's my understanding that it's already the broadest education savings account in the country. Are there any specific changes off the top of your head you'd like to see with the Hope?
Well, it actually isn't today. They set the law up so in a couple years, remember there was a time lag in terms of the application of Hope Scholarship started, then several years later it broadened. So I want to make sure that we're continuing down the broadening pathway. So that's number one. But two, I think I want to work with the legislature and the members of the Hope Scholarship Board. And I was a member of the Hope Scholarship Board when I served as the Attorney General, and to look for different ways we can continue to make that program successful. The other thing I would mention is that we're going to try to meet with a lot of the schools and interested parties to see how are we coming along. It's early, but how are we coming along, and what can we do to make it even stronger? Because we want programs that succeed, and so to make that happen. Hey,
You felt if, say, we had the same basic flatline budget we had, we'd be looking at a deficit at the next fiscal year?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
You're anticipating a deficit?
Not for the time ending June 30th, 2025.
Right.
We anticipate for July 1st going forward. Yes,
Right.
that's our sense. So, but we have no reason to believe that we wouldn't reach balance for this year
Right,
ending June 30th.
Balance the budget, but...
But we'll see. Remember, there's been a lot of spending in the last few months, so we're going to be analyzing that to make sure.
What happened to the rocket ship ride? That's what they get.
All I'm going to say is that we have an opportunity to move forward and to look out for the taxpayers' interest and be fiscally prudent, and I'm excited to do that. And I'm eager to make sure we're identifying right away that are costing taxpayers money. I'm going to do that. So the good news here is that there are a number of positive things going on. We have to make sure, though, that that July 1st period, we have to make sure it's balanced for this year. But also that July 1st period, we have to ensure that the progress and the numbers that we've seen recently, they're going to continue. Bob, I'll leave you with this. You know that I had asked for the tax cuts to get paid for. They have not been paid for. It falls to the governor to be able to address that. We're going to have to do that for this fiscal year. And I've said that we're going to have West Virginia be the lowest income tax of every state that we touch. So I support it, but we do have to pay for it. And that's part of what we're going to be looking at over the course of the next.
The power to reverse those several spending announcements that were made in recent weeks.
So I think the answer is it all depends, right? So we'll look through, obviously if something's obligated already or there's a contract, then that's not something you can touch, right? So, but there might be things or plans that are in the work and the contract's not finalized. And this is not to pick on any particular issue. This is just good, prudent management of taxpayer dollars. Put more money in taxpayers' pockets, that's a great thing. So this is something that every organization should do. Quite frankly, I look to do this as AG. We immediately put spending restraints in place to make sure that the dollars went out the door consistent with the principles of looking out for taxpayers.
Should the Water Development Authority be making loans outside of its area of water?
Look, we're going to look at all of these different issues. And so as we go forward, I'm happy to talk about them, but we're going to be analyzing, we'll look at all these different issues, and as we review all this, we'll report back to you, and we'll let you know.
On just two things here real quick. Number one, on tax cuts. You called for tax cuts yesterday. Is it your belief that you should allow the formula that's there with the triggers to continue, or are you calling for new tax cuts from this legislative session?
We're going to be talking with the legislative leaders about how we can best effectuate some of the changes to the tax code. But Curtis, I'll say this. My sense is that West Virginia has an outdated tax code, and we need to be looking holistically at the whole tax code so it's less complex and it's looking out more for our people. And part of our goal that I've talked about for years is how we get West Virginia that we touch. That's going to require new legislation. So I'll look forward to working with the legislature to make that happen. And I'm not going to go through all the potential changes that may be required to make that happen or give you a time on that, but just do know that's in the works. And as we get to the point where we have a specific date, we'll be sure to report that to you.
And then the other question that we're getting into the newsroom is a simple one. Do you plan to live in the mansion?
I'm going to tell you that the other night we had a little roof leak in the roof. And so I didn't stay in the mansion one night, but I slept in the mansion last night. So I am hopeful I will be spending a lot of time in the mansion. As you know, I also deeply love the Eastern Panhandle, and I try to get home whenever I can. But I think you're going to be expecting to see me here, and I have a vision of the law in terms of the residency and the requirement to be in Charleston. I think you'll expect to see me here an awful lot.
I have another question for
Yeah.
you regarding wanting to work with the congressional delegation on,
Yeah.
fentanyl, establishing it as
Sure.
a weapon of mass destruction. I would say, what would you expect maybe from the Trump administration if you're wanting to work with them on establishing fentanyl as that weapon? And
Yeah.
what do you kind of hope to see from the federal level and also the state level in order, like the implications of that?
I think it's a game changer, because one of the concerns I've had, and I've talked to President Trump about this in the past, is that fentanyl is ravaging our state. And we know that the opioid epidemic, the pain pill problem that we've had for a long time, that's evolved, right? So as it's evolved, one of the deep concerns has been that a lot of the illicit fentanyl that's originated in China, that went down to Mexico, where the packages were put together and manufactured, then they came across the border, they make their way right here to West Virginia. I've been very worried about that, because we have to make sure that we're stopping, how important this issue is for the citizens of West Virginia. And obviously, I've talked to the Trump administration and their people about it. I think that they have a great deal of interest in doing more to close down the border, right? I don't think anyone would argue. President Trump cares about that, and he knows that illicit drugs coming in is a big part of it. And I agree with President Trump on that, as well as many other issues. But I know that our delegation is going to be very engaged in this issue, and I want to express that I want to work with them to talk about the unique impact on West Virginia and how much fentanyl is slaughtering our kids.
And I have one more question.
Yeah.
So just regarding DEI, how many positions might we be seeing cut across the state level? And then, is that going to save the state money? Why are you doing this? Why are you cutting DEI?
Well,
And what was the motive?
Or various issues that we want to be consistent with the law of the land. The U.S. Supreme Court issued a really important Supreme Court decision several years ago. I want to make sure that's enforced. And so that's a big part of it. And I'm a believer in equal protection under the law. We want to treat everyone the same, regardless of sex, race, color. And that's the intent behind it. And that's why we're making that announcement today.
How many positions might we be seeing cut?
It would be too early to know. I think that there are a number of things that are going on right now. We're engaging in the review. But this is about policy. Whether there ends up being changes in expenditures or not, I don't know. But I will say this. There will be no DEI in West Virginia state government. And if there are entities that are getting state-based dollars, there should be no DEI that's associated with that. Those are things that we can impact and control, and I want to send a very firm message about that today.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Leah?
Thank you. When it comes to working with the legislature
Yeah.
to clarify the gender question,
Yeah.
what are
I want to sit down with the legislature, but as you all know, there's been a lot of discussion and debate about the definitions of men and women, and we've seen that down in the AG's office. The AG's office is currently defending a number of laws where these questions are coming front and center. And so I think it's prudent to work with the legislature to clarify, number one, because we think that this is consistent with the law, it's consistent with West Virginia values. I think in many cases, we're looking out for the young women in our state to make sure that they're being protected and things are handled right. But I'm eager to talk with them about that because I'm watching, and whether it's Medicaid issues, we're talking about the schools, the locker rooms, or the state's position in litigation.
Thank you. Yeah, that one of my follow-ups is going to be whether this could impact, like, is the Medicaid case still pending?
That's still pending.
So could this be something that could impact that case, people getting coverage for hormones or something?
Well, we're obviously going to look at all these different, the past administration's position on that, and I expect that that will continue now that, I serve as governor, and I anticipate the current attorney general. Just a note for a couple days from now, I believe, and by the way, Tom McCaffrey's here too, but are we looking at Thursday for? Yes. So we'll give you the date. So on Thursday, we expect that we're going to have another opportunity to sit down, and we're hopeful we can share some budget-related information for you. Because, and as we're learning about it, we want to share with you what we think the current condition of the budget is, both in terms of where we are now and where we may be from July 1st going forward. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming, and get ready for an enjoyable ride. Oh, yes. We wanted to do a ceremonial executive order signing, if that's of interest to you, but we will make all the EOs available to you as we're gaining access to our email and social media systems, that things will be even easier in the future. This is Executive Order number 1, our backyard brawl. All right. So, excellent. So we will make, we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. You're welcome. Nice to see you. Excellent. At least whether folks agree with me or not, I try to be exactly.